Thank you very much, Madam President. Before I address the issue of college affordability, I just want to send my condolences to families in Oregon, another community ravaged by a school shooting, the 37th of 2014, the 74th school shooting since Sandy Hook. Those are pretty stunning numbers. 37 school shootings this year alone. It's more than one a week. 74 school shootings since Sandy Hook. And I'll just make the comment one more time, Madam President, that we are becoming accomplices in these mass murders. We are becoming complicit in this murder of children all across our country. When we do nothing, when we sit on our hands idly as children are gunned down all across our country, we send a message of acceptance. Now, we can do practical things that will lessen the chance that people will be killed in our schools and in our homes and in our neighborhoods. And I won't go through the list right now, but we also can send a message that enough is enough. And that message, frankly, at this point, is probably just as important as the practical effects of the laws that we would change. Madam President, thank you for your great work on bringing the issue of college affordability to the point where we have reached a national debate around what we can do to try to relieve families of the crippling debt that are sitting on top of them today. As the youngest member of this body, I perhaps know in as personal as terms as anyone else does about what this burden means for me and my wife, who continue to owe money on our student loans, and for our neighbors and friends who are in similar positions. I just want to tell you a story today of one such family. Namesake of mine, the Murphys from Killingworth, no relation. Dennis Murphy recently wrote me about his family's story. Dennis is 52 years old and he's got 5 kids. His parents emigrated here from County Kerry, Ireland, and he was born in New York. His family lived in a small apartment in the Bronx, and while Dennis was still a boy, his family moved to a house in East Haven, Connecticut, which his father called the Promised Land. His father died at the age of 50 when Dennis was just 14 years old. And since the family was really poor and the father didn't have life insurance, Dennis couldn't afford to go to college himself. And so he went straight to work. He was lucky enough to find a job working for the railroad, working as a locomotive engineer for Metro North. He still works at that job, Dennis does, making a good living and earning a solid upper middle class salary. Now, Dennis wanted to provide a better life for his own family, so he worked as much as he could, took as many hours as he could. He took as many extra shifts as possible. He worked on holidays, and he was eventually able to make his life better, make his family's life a little bit better. They bought a house in Killingworth, and he hoped that his kids would get to go to college. One of his daughters has a learning disability and needs extra support, so that took up a decent amount of the family's income. But his oldest son, Dennis Murphy Jr., was a good student in high school, made the honor roll. And when Dennis Jr. was accepted to the University of Albany, Dennis was so proud that his son would receive the college degree that he never did. Dennis Jr. had worked since the age of 16 to do his part to be able to afford college, and he continued working all throughout college. Dennis Jr. seldom asked his dad for any money. And unlike many of his friends, Dennis Jr. actually graduated within 4 years. But the family still had to contribute to Dennis Jr.'s education. So without any money saved away, with money going to pay for the house and for raising 5 kids and for their daughter's learning disabilities, Dennis had to take out PLUS loans that ultimately totaled over $100,000. And because the interest rate on the loans are fixed at 8.5%, the minimum monthly payments were around $700 to $800 a month. With their mortgage payments and the rest of their living expenses, Dennis cannot afford to pay this amount, even with his good salary. And frankly, like a lot of Americans, he didn't realize when he first took out the loans how the interest would add up over 4 years, nor did he understand how much those monthly payments would be. And the stress of wondering how they're ever going to pay back this huge debt has just caused a lot of tension in the family, a lot of arguments within his formerly close family. Sometimes Dennis says that he wonders whether he should have let his son go to college at all. And even though Dennis Jr. has a new good job earning $20 an hour because of his degree, it's not enough for him to be able to contribute significantly to paying off these loans either. Madam President, Dennis's family came to America, got that little apartment in the Bronx for reasons that are familiar to nearly every one of us in this chamber. This idea that if you came to the United States, you had a shot to move and move quickly, a fair shot at economic mobility. Now, my family came from Ireland about 2 generations before Dennis's, but it was the same reason that brought them here to the United States. And it was education that was the vehicle for advancement. And you know what? It wasn't a myth. It wasn't a story that they just told in places like Ireland and Italy and Poland. It was true that if you came here and did your work and played by the rules and saved a little bit of money, that you could go to college and you could do significantly better than your parents did. But the reality is that idea, that truism of America being the home of the greatest level and alacrity of economic mobility in the world is becoming a myth. The odds today that a young person will go to college if their parent didn't is 29%. That is one of the lowest rates in the industrialized world. Think of it the other way. 70% of kids whose parent didn't go to college will never go to college. 70% of kids whose parents didn't go to college will essentially be destined to live the same life and take in the same income level that their parents did. That is a stunning lack of economic mobility. And the truth is that it is getting worse specifically for a particular group of Americans. For African Americans, the gap between those with a college degree in the African American community and in the white community has gone from 13 points 20 years ago to 20 points today. That gap for Latinos was 18 points 20 years ago. It is 25 years ago today. So for African Americans and the Latinos, that dream of economic mobility is getting even farther away than for other folks. America used to be number 1 in the world with respect to the amount of adults, young adults, who had college degrees. We're 12th in the world today. In a really short period of time, we've gone from leading the world in college graduates to becoming rather middling. And you don't frankly need a college degree for one thing. You don't need a college degree to figure out why less people have college degrees. Here it is. Since 1989, the cost of college has gone up by 307%, and income for the average family has gone up by 72%. You don't need a degree in mathematics or a graduate degree in rocket science to understand that when you have this disparity between the growth in income and the growth of the cost of college, you are going to leave millions of families on the outside when it comes to accessing the apparatus of opportunity that has historically made this country the place where economic mobility was more real than anywhere else. So that's why this piece of legislation this week matters so much, because to Dennis, the numbers are not going to lie. For Dennis, he's going to go from paying 8.5% to about 6.4%. And you think that's only 2 percentage points. That is thousands of dollars in savings for the Murphys, thousands of dollars that today they don't have. And that story can be multiplied hundreds of thousands of times over. We think there's about 300,000 families just in the state of Connecticut who are going to be able to access a lower rate of interest based on the legislation that we're going to pass this week. And so these numbers are pretty stunning, but the fact is that there are stories like Dennis's all across my state and all across this country. And we can do something about it this week. But Madam President, as Senator Harkin said, and let me finish with the thought that this is the beginning of the work that we have to do. The reality is that it's really important to give students access to lower cost loans. And as we will hopefully do this week, it's really important to lower the borrowing burden for families that have already taken out loans. But we actually have to get serious about this number. We actually have to get serious about bending this curve so that college isn't 307% more expensive another 20 years from today. And so I would hope that in the reauthorization bill that our committee, the HELP Committee, is going to undertake, an idea that has been put forward by myself and Senator Schatz and Senator Sanders and Senator Murray will get a fair airing. And that is the idea that we should start expecting some accountability when it comes to these schools that are getting billions of dollars in federal aid. We send out $140 billion in federal aid every year, and we really have very loose accountability standards when it comes to affordability and outcomes, such that a group of schools under the for-profit umbrella of a company called Corinthian out in California has 50% of its students dropping out after 1 year, 36% of the students defaulting on their student loans. They charge $41,000 for a paralegal degree, and the local community college charges $2,500. That's a miserable set of outcomes. That is a total lack of affordability, and yet they collect $1.6 billion every year in federal aid. $1.6 billion in federal aid every year. That's federal aid means you and I, our taxpayer dollars, going to a school that is doing nothing about affordability and is delivering really bad outcomes. And so this week's bill is really important for the Murphys and for hundreds of thousands of families like them. But our work is not done. It's time for us to agree that in addition to making it easier for students and families to afford college, it's finally time for the United States Congress to put some real pressure on these schools to do something about the cost of tuition and the quality of degrees that they provide. I'm going to be very excited to cast my vote for this week's legislation for the Murphys, no relation, and thousands of families like them in Connecticut. I yield back.